You know, a colleague of mine who also did GBHI in my year, Fumi Akindajoy, I don't know if you know Fumi. So we co-wrote a paper together, a bunch of other people's, and diet was one of the factors. And of course, everyone was med diet. And she was like, can we please put something in about traditional Yoruba diets? Because it's not, you know, it's not applicable.
Because I think to some extent, like, I've had conversations with people, especially from the US. And when I say our staple food is basically a huge chunk of carbs, and we basically eat that from the time you're born to the time that you die.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know if you've been to any of the African countries.
No, I've been to South Africa.
Okay. So what does South Africa call it? Pop.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the South African version is like softer.
Okay.
But if you go above South Africa all the way to Tanzania, like it's almost a solid thing. So you have to go like munch it with your hands.
Okay.
Then, yeah. So people have been doing that, and I know people that eat that 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And they don't look anything like obese. I suppose like the entire conference since yesterday, I think there are certain things that have personal views that I think very strong. Like, for example, biomarkers in early life, especially if there's no symptom presentation and how it's communicated. It's like, well, the moment you have a certain accumulation of amyloid, then you have dementia. For me, I think it actually brings more stress than considering we don't have like lots of like care supports.
I agree. I think some of the work that I do is around fear of dementia and why for some people having a family history of dementia is very fearful and can lead them to say, okay, I'm going to do everything to be proactive in my life to stop myself getting this condition. But for other people, it can cause them to completely avoid, you know, they become depressed and there's kind of a downward trend. And I'm trying to understand why some people go in one direction and the other. And I think with this biomarker stuff, it's all really exciting, but I'm concerned about putting all that information out there without, as you say, the care support systems or the implementation systems. So people worrying actually access this. So you're telling them hypothetically there's something you could do, but you're not giving them any means to be able to do that for themselves.
And I think if, let's say, organizations like charity organizations get that particular message, they use it for fundraising purposes, and it's a message that goes into the community. So which is
I do. I've had a lot of conversations with people about what I would just plainly call fear mongering around dementia. So like, well, let's try to increase the fear so we can, you know, pull on those heartstrings and get some money. And it's a very successful model, but I don't think that's why I'm doing science. I think that's why I'm interested in this or dedicated to this field. So, yeah.
Okay, but actually, that's a good way to start a podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. So, are you associate professor?
Assistant.
What's the difference?
It's just a level more money higher. So assistant professor, associate, and then full professor.
So you are associate. Assistant. I've always struggled, like every time I meet someone, I'm like, oh, I'm associate professor. I've heard of assistant, then I've heard professor. What's the difference?
It's in the associate's in the middle. Yeah. Okay. But then they're called different things in different countries. So here in the UK, it's lecturer, senior lecturer, research associate, or I don't know, like their system, but yeah. So that it doesn't help itself using different titles everywhere.
So your interest is in neuroscience. Then today at the conference, you'll be talking about women's health, which is something I want us to talk about. And you're also interested in, well, like you said, fear mongering.
Yeah, I gave that catchphrase quite quickly, didn't I? Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So to start with, what made you get interested in dementia, to be specific? Because it's a whole wide range of a field of neuroscience. You could have gone for any other.
Yeah. So my original interest was in neuroscience, was in memory systems. So from a really young age, I couldn't understand how memories were formed. Like, how is that happening in the brain? And I thought, okay, I'll do a PhD in neuroscience. I'll do psychology in neuroscience and try to understand the brain more. That was my fascination. which led me to what happens when memory systems break down. So how does that process happen? And I was doing a lot of work in cognitive neuroscience, so giving people cognitive tests, using EEG, MRI, those kinds of things. And I would see when somebody came in for a study, they were so fearful. And their motivation a lot of the time for coming in was to get the brain scan or for me to tell them, you scored this and this means your memory is good or your memory is bad. And usually it would turn into a conversation when you sit down with them afterwards and say, there's a family history, they've seen this happen before. And I realized that none of my work really touched on the emotional side of these conditions. And once that clicked for me, I thought, okay, this is actually what I want to do. I think brain stuff is really important. But really it's about, for me, psychological impact. And then from that led to broader systems. So what are the things people can control versus can't control, and how that then affects, you know, how you live your life basically across the life course and what you pass down to future generations.
Okay. So fear mongering. So the previous podcast that I had, Brother John.
Yeah.
You should see that episode. One of the things that came about is how the medical doctor, the neurologist, actually gave him a diagnosis. Firstly, it was over the phone.
Okay.
And
already terrible.
Yeah. And all he said is, I think you have dementia, and they hung up the phone. Yeah. So basically for me, what that created, firstly, I think maybe it would have been very important for him to actually meet him in person and over the phone. Because you don't know how someone can react or what type of environment they're in and how they're going to take that information. Then I think how he basically said you have dementia was like very strong and strange.
Yeah.
Because the way dementia has been pronounced or communicated is it's basically a death sentence. Imagine you tell someone, oh, you're dying basically, and they don't know what to do. Yeah. Because potentially you'd hope that there's a way that the message would have been communicated and also offered solutions. Even though there is no cure, you could have offered, let's say, support groups, support networks, so see how they can best take care of themselves, like understand what situation someone is in. So but for me, that was interesting. And it's not the first story that I've had about how people communicate the diagnosis. So in your research and interest, is there a specific way that you think we should look at the way we communicate a diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even starting like from the investigations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's plain that type of communication is not good enough. It wouldn't be accepted in a lot of other fields. So we shouldn't accept it in dementia research or in clinical practice. And I think we need to get angrier as a community to not accept this anymore. We know this. You've heard these stories. I've heard these stories. You know, people more senior than us have been telling us these stories. This is not new information that we still have work to do in how we communicate this, both in the clinic and I think in community as well. ADI have a lot of reports that come out around awareness and stigma, and those percentages are still really high. So what can we do to change that? I think from a study perspective, me as a researcher, we tried to put in to really carefully think about this, right? Who are we recruiting? This population, involving community advisory boards. They have different names, but essentially people with lived experience, bringing them in early into the study and saying, this is what we're trying to do. Yep. First of all, what do you think about this, good or bad? And being open to taking that criticism potentially. And then, how do we build the study around the people, not just around we need to get from A to B in the fastest way.
Out of curiosity, like as you train as a researcher, is there like points where you get to learn on how to communicate certain things to your participants?
In my training,
because I know researchers that are like it's 1 + 1 is 2 because they're just thinking very like linear, so they don't care about the outcome of like how they communicate and everything. So I was just wondering if there's like maybe how do you communicate to participants or your patients?
I had no formal training in that. I trained in Ireland. This is I did my PhD. I got a PhD 16, so a while ago now, 10 years ago. We had training in how do you present your work to other scientists? Basically, how do you present at a conference like this? But no real training on how do you communicate with a human participant who's giving up their time and who might be really anxious about this whole experience, or really even understanding their motivations. I think that's another piece, that we collect information about people, but not really the broad context of that. So just as a very specific example, some of the things I'll be talking about today is hormonal contraceptive use and brain health in younger women. So we've tons of data on the numbers of people using hormonal contraceptives, but we don't ask why. And the reasons for that can be very different and can have very different impacts. So some people are taking it because they've been prescribed it because they have a condition like endometriosis. So they're trying to reduce pain. Other people are taking it obviously to not get pregnant, but those are important contextual pieces. But if you look in any data set, you can't actually find that information about that person. And we're not really trained, or at least I wasn't, to think about things that way. It was really results focused. So you got to publish, you got to analyze, you got to publish, on to the next thing.
Oh, actually, another alternative would actually be if, let's say, there isn't enough space for researchers or clinicians to train in how they communicate. I think having support staff would be something that would be worth exploring.
Yeah.
Because if you have someone that's, I don't know, I didn't want to say PR, someone who's communication specialist, they would know basically how to communicate, other than you have dementia. All right, but,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's terrible that that's still how this is being communicated to people. And I think there are other things to think about in this space around. I think about in the States now with these positive PET scans, right? So as you were kind of saying, the earlier shift to what does preclinical Alzheimer's disease mean and how is that diagnosed or even noted in a medical chart. So in the US, you have the right to access your electronic health record. And when you get a blood test or when you get a PET scan, that information normally is uploaded immediately into the medical chart. A lot of worry from clinicians that the patient will get a notification to say new lab results. So this would be the same for any test, new lab result in your chart. The person can go and look at that and it might say amyloid positivity, preclinical Alzheimer's disease, which would be obviously very shocking for somebody. I know clinicians who are trying to call their patients rapidly within the 24 hours to try to get there before that goes into their chart. Obviously, knowing that a phone call is not ideal, but to schedule them to actually come in is near impossible.
So is there a relationship between being fearful of having your diagnosis to how quickly you progress?
I don't know. No, I don't think we know. I don't think we could say that. And I don't think we know. So I've done some work using data from existing clinical trials data, baseline data from the A4 Learn study. And I was looking at people's level of concern about developing Alzheimer's disease at baseline. So it's 6 questions. It's like, I'm fearful of developing Alzheimer's disease in the next 5 years. And you rate it on a Likert scale. There was an association between higher fear or concern reported at baseline and amyloid levels without people knowing what their amyloid level. So there was an association there, but I'm obviously hesitant to, that's not causal. We don't know. There's so many other things, but I think fear is an important signal. It's telling us something. This person is afraid. There's a reason they're afraid. Okay, it could be different reasons, but this is not something to ignore. And it is telling us important information. And I think that's why with things like subjective cognitive decline, so people saying, I notice a change, but their score comes out normal, quote unquote, and they're sent away, they're discharged. I think that's problematic. I understand the limitations of the healthcare system. Doctors need time to see patients, etc. But I think we're ignoring a really potentially important signal there. If the person or their family is noticing something, that's probably worth paying attention to.
Okay. So I'll take you back to women's health and menopause.
Yeah.
So why get interested in women's health when probably even men are going through the same?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think even, the topic of women's health, I get why we're calling it that, but I am always thinking about women exist in societies with men and with families and with sons and husbands and fathers, And I think there needs to be a broader conversation around, so this is not just a women's problem, right?
Yeah.
This is a societal problem. So yes, men are going through these things too. The reason that I ended up focusing in on women's brain health or menopause was I was working on developing a psychosocial intervention to reduce fear of dementia, originally designed for older adults who had a family history. And a lot of women were recruited into that study. We know that risk is higher in women compared to men for dementia. And so one of the pieces of feedback from that work was, what about moving a little bit earlier into midlife? And what about transition? Because during menopause transition, brain fog is a really common symptom. So very ill-defined, you ask two different people, what's brain fog? They'll probably give you two different answers. But a general cognitive fogginess is slowness of processing. Women telling you, again, my thinking isn't where it was. And a lot of fear around that. So for women who have that family history, when they start to experience menopausal brain fog, they're like, is this Alzheimer's? Is this the beginning? Or is it just menopause? Or is it work stress, et cetera, et cetera? So we wanted to develop or adapt our intervention for menopausal women around this idea of fear and brain fog, because most women who experience brain fog through menopause will not go on to develop dementia. So it's not something we should be fear-mongering about.
So would you say women are likely to get dementia than men?
Yeah, that's what the statistics would tell us, that women have about twice the lifetime risk.
Oh, maybe us the men, we don't just go to
medical help. True. Well, that is really interesting how those patterns are different. Consistently when we look in the evidence, a lot of studies, my own included, recruitment is higher of women into studies, right? So I'm always asking, where are the men studies?
Well, I think, I don't know.
Answer.
Well, to speak for everyone.
Please speak for every man, Will. Yeah.
I think it's just the idea that maybe to some extent we worry less about being ill, or like, for example, I don't want to worry about dementia. I want to worry, if I died and I have kids, what will they be eating? So I'll focus my energy on the constructs of what a man should look like, Then maybe, not to speak on behalf of women, maybe because you people are so caring, so loving, and you're like, okay, I need to make sure my health is optimal. So why not take a shot, And probably we take more risks. You're like, probably one day it'll happen. So eventually.
I think you make a good point. I looked at a lot of fear data, or it's called different things, dementia worry, dementia-related anxiety. And there does seem to be a trend towards women being more fearful. Now, is that because their risk is actually higher? Or is it for some of the reasons that you're saying, that women are sort of thinking, I have to keep it together for like the whole family and the whole unit, and men are worrying about, the financial side, or, these sorts of things?
Well, we're just fearful to know what actually is happening.
Yeah.
Because even like with the rise of like prostate cancers, like you find that men just don't, even if they see something wrong happening, they'll just go probably hang out with the boys and not talk about anything, Then later on they go and sit in a corner like, oh, what's wrong with me? But they'll never be able to express it. So I don't know.
Do you think it's changing in younger generations? Because some of the work a lot of what I'll be talking about today is about young adult brain health, and it's through a women's health lens, but so much of it just applies to young adulthood as an important life stage.
I think now that there's more information, I think like when I look at my parents, for example, like the way I'll be worried for each and every pain that I have on my body. I'm like, oh, okay, what's happening here? Go and Google what's happening here. Or you'll be dying in 30 days. But like we have access to information, so that gives us some sort of advantage to try and figure out what's wrong. But it also, I think we've become more open. At least I know, even if I can't talk to my male friends, probably there's a woman I could talk to and say, listen, this is what's going on. What should I do? Because sometimes we just try to avoid conversations amongst our fellow men, and we're like, okay, maybe they'll look down on me. Maybe I won't look man enough. So, So, but when you talk to someone who who probably maybe don't know you, they don't know you that well, and just tell them this is what's going on. I don't know what to do about it. Probably give you some advice. But in general, I think as young people, I think we have more access to information, so we are more likely to seek help.
Yeah, I guess there's more touch points where, not to get into AI or anything, but even things like wearables, or we get a lot more feedback, I think, than if we want to access that, it is available in a way that it just wasn't for previous generations.
Yeah, because if let's say right now I want to see a clinician, they're saying, oh, I have accumulation of amyloid in my brain. I think as much as I would be a little bit fearful, I would still want to know what exactly and how exactly to live my life going forward, right? So, but I think if it happened maybe years before access to information, I'll be very fearful because of the stigma and everything. But now I get to know, okay, it's not just me, probably, Yeah. And there's more online communities that exist. So I think there's that. I don't know. What do you think?
I think so. And then part of me thinks, do we live a little bit in a bubble because we're just so adjacent to this information? And do people really know that this information is out there and how to interpret it? And so I know a couple of years ago, there was a lot of media attention around ApoE4 and risk factors. And if you have two alleles, and it was like loads of media attention around that. But of course, we know, the nuance of the genetics are not the whole story. Lifestyle factors play a huge role, etc. But I'm not sure all of that filters into the broader vision.
I think maybe that's, well, we as young generation tend to be more fearful because there's lots of information coupled with misinformation. Like, if right now I said I have shortness of breath, chest pains, probably the first diagnosis I'm going to receive online is going to be something so scary.
Yeah.
But then I go to the doctor, like, oh, probably, what's the word? I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a heart attack.
Yeah, it's not a heart attack. You're not dying.
Yeah.
Maybe have some sugar. Yeah. So I think it's a fear of misinformation, and right now, like all the language models at GPT and whatnot, they'll always give you the craziest information that is not accurate. Even if you say, "Oh, give me the source of this," you find that source doesn't even exist. So
I think the AI is a concern, and I also just think social media as well. A social media person. But I got an Instagram only to look at the menopause Instagram world. It's the Wild West out there in terms of the information. It is truly wild, the stuff that is being told to women. The like creams and lotions and potions being shilled at them, and people fighting, some people coming into the space and saying this is all inaccurate, and it's just so much shouting. How is somebody supposed to weed through that? And that's what women have told us. We did some focus groups as we were developing our intervention, and they said there's a ton of information out there, but we have no idea what's actually accurate or not, or how to evaluate information. So they were saying, okay, we know we can go to the National Menopause Society, and that's probably a good source of information. But if they come across something in their daily lives, like a news story about a scientific article, they don't necessarily know how to interpret if that's good evidence or not.
I think it's with social media, it's all about it's about hype. If someone tells me, if you take this supplement, you'll be good in bed, for example. So without verifying what that supplement is, I just go and take it and say, okay, I'll give it a shot, right? Yeah. Next thing, your blood pressure spikes and you don't know what's going on. So I just think it's with social media, it's mostly with the hype. And I've seen this like with lots of like women camps, because they'll go talk about the craziest supplements ever. Then maybe they work. Some of them maybe work. Maybe they do work, right? But in my head, I'm always thinking probably they're just overhyped.
Yeah, I think so. The latest, or one of the latest things for women is testosterone.
Yeah.
So now we're not making enough testosterone apparently, and we need to be taking testosterone as women. I mean, it's, it's like you said, it's just all mostly hype, and from what I can see from the data, in terms of supplements, for example, we have some evidence, but they're all really small trials. So we don't even have the numbers. Studies haven't been done, and they haven't been done for long enough to tell us very much.
Yeah. And I think there's a whole market that's always developed, especially for women. I think that's what has brought about all this, because everyone knows that every other woman wants to look good, wants to look beautiful, wants to feel good. So if they say, oh, this serum is going to make your skin very smooth, and everyone wants to try without actually knowing what the side effects might be. So I don't know. Maybe I should ask you, why are you prone to
women? Should I speak for all women?
All women. It's not judgment.
Very honestly, yes, society and how we're raised, right? To think about how we should look, and it's the dual stigma of ageism and sexism, and probably you could keep adding layers in racism and intersectionality, and how we're taught that aging is bad and you should try to stay young and look young and be thin for as long as possible. And as much as we're, as an individual, you try not to buy into that. If it's all around you, it's very hard. And if you've grown up in that, I grew up in the 90s when skinny was a big thing, and now skinny is back and GLP-1s. And so it feels like, here we go again, which is a whole new generation now that are being exposed to that kind of culture, that kind of message. Yeah. In a word, it's just the patriarchy.
you can blame us.
But I think patriarchy is bad for men too, right? Because it teaches you all these things about you got to be masculine, you got to be macho, you got to be going to the gym.
Is the matriarchy any good?
Yeah. Societies would be very successful and can be very successful. I think building our societies more around caring and community and away from, I'm getting really heavy now into like moving away from capitalism. There's this kind of, I think, community piece that I think about a lot in terms of when we think about brain health and what are the protective factors. So we focus so much on risk. We've got to reduce risk. Yeah. But what is actually helping us to flourish in terms of brain health? And other than physical activity, we know that's good, we know diet. But what about things like community, sense of purpose, spirituality? How do we measure these things in a way that the scientific community will believe them? That's the thing, because we need an evidence base, and the evidence base has to exist within the frameworks that exist. But how do you measure something like spirituality, for example, even though a lot of people might say that's a very protective factor for them?
Yeah. So are we talking about spirituality in the context of the matriarchy here? Because there's lots of female gods in mythology.
Yeah.
But I think to some extent I agree and sort of disagree. I think the perfect balance needs to be struck, because I think there's good in embracing masculinity.
I agree.
We need to find a balance in how we define what is toxic masculinity. And at the same time, I don't believe men would have to become more matriarchal in nature, because they still need to be men. Otherwise, they'll not be men. So, because for example, I think there are certain aspects that I see of myself that I have changed now, because I'm more open to being vulnerable, right? If I'm going through stuff, it might take time for me to actually speak to a person, but I know I need to talk to someone.
Yeah.
So eventually I just tell a person like, hey, I'm going through BS here, but I need to talk to you, but I'm not ready to talk about it right now, but I need to talk to you. I just need you to know. Yeah. Right. Then maybe after 2-3 days, maybe I'm ready. Then I'm like, oh, this is what happened. And this is how I'm trying to deal with it. But in the same sense, I feel, for example, I could also learn to be, as a man, to be more caring, to be more vulnerable to the people that are around me and support them the way a mother or any other woman would support me, for example. So I think those are bits that I think they're like the matriarchy, the patriarchy is like all both extremes, but it's about how do you get to a place where there's like perfect balance. For example, I actually believe like, so in Zambia, there's a tribe called Bemba. So pre-colonial, that tribe has been like a matriarchal society. Women have been leaders. Like, if let's say I get paid, if I belong to that tribe, all my earnings, I'm going to go to the woman in my life. Let's say in that case, my wife, right? And she's going to divide and decide what are the priorities, what are the...
Yeah.
Because as a guy, I'm just going to say, oh, okay, let's go party, you know? So those are things that sometimes I look at myself and I'm like, oh, I'm actually not a good planner myself. But when I have a conversation with my wife and she's like, oh, she has it all figured out. So I don't even make budgets anymore. I'm just like, oh, I'm just like,
but I think this is something that is borne out in the data a little bit in terms of how much sort of the potentially negative side of all that responsibility being on women, as in the negative consequences for men, because we find when men are divorced or when their wives die, there's a drop off in health, right? Or there's so many times I've heard,
because there's no one to make a budget for me.
Or to tell me, you got to go to the doctor. Let me book this appointment for you. You know, there's a lot of women who are managing that whole health side, or go get your prostate checked. True. You know, and kind of forcing those uncomfortable, maybe embarrassing conversations for men. But I do agree with you. I think we need a balance. I'm not saying take all the power away from the men. That's not the quote to take from this.
Part of the patriarchy. So in terms of, I'll take you back to menopause. So we know that when a woman is experiencing menopause, they have some sort of brain fog, and sometimes, I don't know how you define brain fog, but there are people that I know, it's like some episodes of memory loss and everything through that process. So because most of them tend to start the menopause after maybe 40, 45, right? So in that moment, if let's say someone started late, or they started early, is there any relation in how their brain functions after menopause in relation to dementia?
Yeah, there was a really nice systematic review that came out recently about this. I don't know if Martha Hickey was the senior author, but she's a professor in Australia. She was involved in it. And they were trying to answer this question. You know, what is the answer to this question? So essentially, in general, if you go through what's called natural menopause, there's no real no consistent association with dementia risk either way. If you go through early menopause, usually surgical menopause, so you've had your ovaries removed, and if that happens before the age of 45, so early surgical menopause, that does seem to increase your risk of dementia. But that's really all we can say in terms of the timing, not accounting for other things like hormone therapy, which is a whole other, conversation. But in terms of just ages, that's the evidence that we have. But also acknowledging that there are differences in what we think of as natural or normal age at menopause. It does vary slightly based on region. So the median age in the US, for example, is 52. But it seems to be slightly earlier in Latin American countries.
Do you think that would be the best time for a person to have their brain checked so that they can see how much any of the biomarkers are in their body?
Yeah, I do think a big focus on brain health in late 40s, early 50s is a great time to be doing this stuff. I'm not saying everybody should go and get amyloid checked necessarily, but I do think it's an important thing to be thinking about so that people are aware when they do get into late 50s, early 60s. They're kind of attuned to what to expect, in the same way that I think we need to know more about, people need to understand more about cancer risk and alcohol use when you get over the age of 40. So drinking a lot after that age really shoots up your cancer risk. I don't know that a lot of people necessarily know that,
Because I'm of the idea that when we figure out how we communicate all these findings to do with the biomarkers and dementia predisposition, I think we need to figure out how we could actually, potentially, by the time you're 40, it should be a basic thing to check, to go to see a doctor and have it checked. because then you could know potentially what you would want to reduce on, what you want to modify, what risk factor you need to work on. For example, I think when unfortunately I need to reduce on the amount of music I listen to. My volume is always
high.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You gotta turn them. You gotta turn them down. Gotta turn them down.
Yeah. So I think at some point we need to get to a place where those are just become basic necessities in a medical checkup.
I think we need to build that awareness from a much younger age, though. You know, we need to be teaching kids essentially and young adults about brain health and what that means and established risk factors and how these trajectories develop over time. So somebody doesn't just, they're not just 50 and suddenly they have diabetes.
Yeah.
They probably had pre-diabetes for quite a long time before that, but it was flying under the radar, and not being caught because it's not something we think about and it's not something people necessarily screen for, or you don't know that you need to be thinking about these things. So I think the conversation needs to start way earlier as a culture, as a society, to be thinking about brain health and not just dementia as an old age disease.
Because I think the HIV community, I don't know why I say that, but the people working in the HIV space have done that so well that I remember when I was in my 3rd grade, we were even reciting poems on HIV.
Really?
So by the time I grew up, I already knew what I needed to do.
Exactly.
Right? Like, don't use used razor blades, don't have unprotected sex, don't, if you do, this is what you need to do, seek medical help. I think this is something we need to start learning from a young age. Like, okay, this is how your brain develops. This is how you can protect it. This is basically we are basically trying to prevent dementia from happening. So I think it could be a good thing if we did that in the dementia space. So talking about young people, what do you think about contraceptives?
And brain health?
Yeah, in brain health. So because as young people become more sexually active, at least I speak for sub-Saharan Africa.
Sure.
Most of what we're taking is contraceptives because for whatever reason, So is there any relation when it comes to, because especially women, most people that take contraceptive, does that bring about any other risk in brain health?
So I looked a little bit at hormonal contraceptives, so like taking the pill, and brain health. And this came from a focus group we did with young adults. And one of the women in this group said, she's in her 20s, and she said, I'm on the pill. What does that do to my brain? So we did a couple of reviews trying to look at the evidence base for this. So what's the association between taking hormonal contraceptives as a young adult and brain health outcomes? We found, I'll be talking about this a little bit later, we found 12 studies. Okay, so already not a lot of evidence. 8 of those showed a favorable association. So hormonal contraceptive use was associated with some sort of like a lower Alzheimer's clinical risk, greater gray matter volume, like all very different outcomes. So very difficult to compare across studies. But 8 studies found favorable association, 4 found no association. But all of these studies except 1 were conducted retrospectively. So they were asking women, average age of about 65, about their patterns of hormonal contraceptive use when they were 20. So women are amazing and have amazing memories. But in terms of trying to remember what you're taking and for how long and when you started, I mean, come on. And then also there's a generational difference, as you said. So women now in their 60s were 20, in what year compared to the generations now and the trends that we're seeing. So I think we have a lot more work to do in building that evidence base in contemporary cohorts and in cohorts that are not all global north. I mean, I'm going to say this as well, but 4 of those 12 studies were UK Biobank. That's 1/4 of the evidence base that we found is the same UK study. We need more studies. We need studies from different regions, because as we know, it's not a one size fits all. Context really matters.
Yeah, definitely. We need more studies from. I don't know. I don't like the global north, global south.
Do you not?
No, I don't.
Okay, my colleague.
I've never been a fan.
Used it because my colleague, I would have used LMIC.
Oh, not that I'm offended when people say it.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't like, because it's like saying we the common people. When people use the word common people, they mean poor people, but they're just trying to be politically correct by not saying poor people.
So what would you say instead of global south, global north?
I don't know. Specify what continent you're looking at.
Yeah.
Why is there a north? What does it mean north? These are like wealthy countries, developed countries, and global south is like poor countries. Well, on paper, they are poor countries, but they're still successful in the way that they live. So I've just never liked that.
Yeah.
But
I, as I said, used to use LMIC because that's what a lot of people say. And my colleague from Chile said to me, stop using that because, you know, not all countries in Latin America are LMICs. There's a lot of countries that fall into wealthy categories. And so it's not, he's like, don't use that. He's global north, global south. So now I switched to that, but now I have to switch to something else.
No, you don't have to.
No, but it is important. So now I really take the point that you're saying that, you know, it does have an implication for like, you're different from me, or it's, there is a connotation of...
Well, the truth is we're different.
Yeah.
Right? So is there a way that I could talk of the US in a positive light, right? Other than what it's known for.
Yeah.
Right? So I would say, Donald Trump's country, for example, in this case, everyone would be like, oh, why are you using that? But if, let's say, we talked about Africa and specified what exactly we mean when we say global south, for example, because when I look at Zambia, and when you compare it to, for example, the Western countries, let's say we are not developed, but our definition of success as a local person is very different.
Yeah.
For example, I'll tell you, my definition of success is own a piece of land, have a house, and have a pickup truck.
Okay.
And I'm good.
Yeah.
That's my definition of success, right? So I'm not looking for multi-millions. And if you go to Africa, you find most people are actually happy. But it's when we look at Zambia and compare it to England, for example, then we say, oh, I think we are doing way better than they are. Then we say, they're poor and they're not. But most people are actually happy. So it's how do you define those things that makes it very difficult for me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I would like to disclose that I'm not from the US. Just so you know.
I know you're Irish.
Irish Italian. So my definition of success is a house, good food, you know, access to good food, my Italian food, and just doing something that I feel has value and being able to spend time with friends and family. End of list. That's my definition.
You know,
and I think, you know, having worked in a US setting for the last 4 years now, where there is a lot of focus on money, basically. Yeah, I think there is a big cultural difference there from Ireland. I'm like, that's interesting.
Because I think like when I did like the World Atlantic Way last year, yeah, I loved it in the countryside. I wouldn't even lie. Like, if I had to say in Ireland and had a choice to choose where I want to live, I would pick one of the countrysides.
Yeah.
Specifically on the West Coast.
West Coast is the most beautiful. I mean, if you're looking for good quality.
But you won't see the fancy American style of buildings. That doesn't mean that area is underdeveloped.
Yeah. You know? And I mean, America is an extremely unequal society, right? They, you know, in terms of the middle class or the shrinking middle class. So super rich or no healthcare, you know. It's
so that's the only reason I don't like the classification of what that looks like, because it's all capitalistic in description.
And words are important, you know. I think to go back to a lot of people hate the word dementia, and yet we feel we still have to use it. I was at a meeting the other day and somebody kept saying caregiver burden. Someone with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease was like, I hate that, because it makes, you're saying essentially I'm a burden. It's not, I'm not the burden, the disease is a burden. But when you say caregiver burden, you know, that's how that comes across to them. And we had a big discussion about what should we say instead, and everybody had different ideas. So I think it's about the conversation and openness.
What do you think if we had to rebrand the word dementia, what did it look like?
I like the approach of being specific about the actual disease, the underlying disease. So Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body disease, frontotemporal. I think that's a nice way to move things and just move away from dementia. That's not a diagnosis. That shouldn't be what people are hearing.
Because I had a very interesting conversation with Craig this morning, and he actually agrees with. Like, because what I've found is the alternatives are always not good, because people, like, for example, people try to use Alzheimer's disease instead of dementia, but it doesn't do any good, because it makes Alzheimer's disease look like it's the only disease that's there. And probably even funders will focus on what's more talked about and whatnot. I'm curious to know what people think would be an alternative.
Yeah. And what did you land on earlier?
Oh, we didn't land on anything. So Craig is of the idea that each disease should be identified as a disease, because the umbrella term focuses only on particular symptoms, and says, oh, this is the umbrella term for this presentation. But even other presentations could be some other types of dementia. So.
And I think it's a challenge for, say, organizations or charities who call themselves a dementia charity or who call themselves an Alzheimer's charity, for the same reason that you said, it lumps everybody under that umbrella, or you feel like you don't have a community there, especially for early onset, which we haven't talked about. But, that's a whole other piece that I think is really underrepresented, especially when we focus so much on dementia.
Well, we don't even have a young onset dementia report, so.
Yeah, exactly,
So that's... Yeah, so I'm more concerned about like how we name certain things, and I try to be careful. Like when I went for ADI, I was trying not to say the word dementia because I think the French people don't use it, so they prefer using Alzheimer's disease and other disorders to mean other types of dementia. So there's also other disorders, which I also didn't like. So I was like, oh, what should I say? But it's interesting. Then maybe last question, next gen.
Yeah.
So I know your next gen and I know Lorenzo's house next gen. I don't know what the difference is, because when I was reading about you, where you've worked, I don't know whether you still work with Lorenzo's house. I'm not sure what's the difference between your next gen and their next gen.
Our next gen is a research program. So our focus is on building a research evidence base. Whereas my understanding of Lorenzo's house is education and advocacy is a key. I mean, you probably can describe Lorenzo's house activities better than me. In that way, they're very complementary. I know that they do some research, but I don't think that's their primary focus. And we do some advocacy, but our focus is predominantly on conducting research into young adult brain health.
Okay. So is this research conducted by the next geners for the next geners?
Yeah, until I age out of that group, which is rapidly happening. So for us, a young adult is an 18 to 39-year-old. I've got a few more years. Yeah, that's the idea, I think, and acknowledging I'm not an 18-year-old, so we need to be asking 18-year-olds what research questions we should ask, like the 20-year-old who said, what's birth control doing to me? I'm very cognizant that that group is not a monolith. 18 is very different from a 39-year-old in a lot of ways. So we need to be making sure that we're constantly checking in with our lived experience groups that help to guide us in terms of the questions we ask and how we communicate the findings.
So when you do your research, is it you doing research for young people or actually even mentoring the young people to do research?
I think
because it's very difficult for a young person to enter the research world, especially if they haven't gotten any successful funding.
Yeah, I think it's both. My position now, I staff who I work with, postdocs, data scientists, research coordinators. A lot of these people want to go into clinical psychology or want to go into a research PhD. So that is a huge piece of it. And mentoring people, how do you run a research study? How do you, like, the realities of it and the challenges of it, not what you see on paper or on people's CVs, which is all a nice polished piece, but how do you deal with rejection? How do you get a paper published? How do you pay for things? How do you access things?
How do you write?
How do you write? How do you present? How do you present to different audiences? So yeah, I think so. I think that's something that is always front and center for us. And I do some work in Ireland as well with Dementia Research Network Ireland, with the explicit focus on that, shine a light on the early career researchers, give them the opportunity to take the stage and present their work, provide them feedback and provide them support.
Okay. So are you looking down to expand in Africa.
Yes.
This is me trying to pitch a proposal right now.
Accepted. It's done. Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. So we've worked through GBHI. One of the things I'll be talking about as well is our global surveys, trying to better understand brain health in young adults. We've 93 countries and counting represented. We've translated the survey into lots of different languages, and we've been working with whoever we can, basically, to try to get representation, good representation across the globe. So trying to balance, okay, well, we have 1,000 people already from Europe. That continent is now closed so that we don't end up with 98% white European sample. So yes, absolutely, we want to expand. The longer term plan would be to be able to almost have a cohort study. I think that would look very different if we think about cohort studies in young adults. But certainly for that, we wouldn't want to just do that in, say, the US and the UK. So yeah, let's get working. You're not busy, right? You have time?
Yeah, I'm not that busy, and I'm yet to be busy, but not now. Probably when we work on it, then I'll be busy.
Yeah.
Then I'll be telling people, I'm not now, I'm busy.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much for being generous with your time and sharing with me your work. Yeah, hopefully we meet soon and we do an update on this.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been really fun chat. Thank you.